Hello and welcome back to Mesmeric Development. Today we will be taking a look at creating some character movement inside of Flax. This is going to be pretty simple. We're just going to have it standard FPS. So the camera will rotate up and down on the x-axis independently of the character, which will actually be rotating on the y-axis, and it will also rotate the camera with it on the y-axis just through standard parenting. Um, so basically, the first thing I want to do is actually just define a float for sensitivity so we can determine how fast all this is happening. Um, Next up, we're going to need some values to clamp how far we look on the x-axis with the cameras. So I'm just going to define a minimum clamp and a maximum clamp. The other thing I want to have is camera smoothing, and even if you aren't going to have this, you can just set that to 1 or 0, but you still need to have it. You don't need to like necessarily inspect it, but if you aren't doing that, you can just create a private float. Smoothing equals 1, but it will be necessary to have at least. So I'm just going to make that. All right. I also want some speed for our movement so we can determine how fast that's happening. And I want to get the actors for that. Next up, I just want to reset some values each time we make them because I want to add these values of x rot and y rot, but I actually haven't made those. So I want to be able to add to these two values each time. So I'm going to make those values here, and I'm just going to define all of them all at once here and say what we do. So we want to be able to add this underscore I want. We want to be able to add the x rot to that each frame. That way we can actually have the values going from 1 to 0 to 2, whatever. That way we don't just have the values going like that. We can actually add 1 to 50 or whatever the current rotation is. So we actually need to be able to get the input from the mouse to be able to add those values together. So I'm just going to do that. But first, I actually just am going to set the cursor state here. And that's going to be setting it to cursor visible equals false, so we can't see it. And I also want to set the cursor to cursor lock mode dot locked, and that will just keep it at the center. Next up for the mouse input, that's just going to be a vector2 mouse delta equals new vector2 input dot get axis mouse x input dot get axis mouse y. Pretty standard. Now what I want to do is with this x rot value, I want to set that equal to plus mouse delta y times sensitivity. And like I said, we wanted to add on to it, so I want to be able to add x rot to underscore x rot. So I also want to be able to clamp this slow. So I'm just going to do the same for y rot real quick, and we can clamp x rot with this here. So x rot equals mathf.clamp, and I want to be able to clamp the x rot value plus mouse delta x, and we're just going to do that by the minimum and the maximum clamp values that we defined up here. Next up, what I want to be able to do is just basically the same for y rot, but I'm just going to set that equals to plus equals y rot. Anyways, what we can do next is we can actually rotate the players and the actors with quaternion.lerp. So we can set that to player.local orientation is what we want to rotate from, and we want to rotate to quaternion.euler 0, comma, underscore yrot for the y-axis and just 0, and that's where we feed in the smoothing is after the vector 3 put in with quaternion.euler. So we rotate around the y-axis with y rot, and I want to be able to rotate around the x-axis with the x rot. So I'm going to lerp to that by rotating the camera, just the same, except we move the rotation value to the x-axis, and we're using underscore x rot instead of underscore y rot. And next up, let's start with the movement. So for movement, I just need to define the if statements. So I put those in real quick. Basically, we're just setting a float. So we're setting this forwards value, and we are setting this right value to either 1 or -1 based on if keyboard got get key forward or got key backwards. If this is not true, we set it to 1. If get the forwards key is not true and the backwards is true, we set it to -1, and everything else will just be 0. We follow the same logic for the right and left keys. Can I just get rid of these statements? So you could take a look at that. Pretty simple logic there. And I actually want to be able to move based on these values. So I'm just going to create fixed update here. And then inside of fixed update, what I want to do is define some values. Now, we could have a small problem with this. We're going to be moving the character based on these two values. However, if say right equals 1 and forwards equals 1, now we have 2. However, we don't want to have 2. We would want both of those to equal 1 together. So we can just implement some logic here. We can make an underscore r and an underscore f for forwards. And then we can just implement some simple logic. If both of these are not 0, we can say if right equals 1, it equals 0.5. If it equals negative 1, we want it to equal negative 0.5, and we'll do the same for forwards down here. Now, after we do that, we can just move the player with player's simple move. This will basically just do gravity for us, so that's nice. That's why I like using simple.move. And then this looks a little bit confusing, but it's not too bad. So basically, we are just moving based on the vector 3 for the forward, and we're multiplying that towards our times our forward float, and then we are going on the transform.right, and we're multiplying that by the r, and we just add those together to get the final product. And we will multiply all of it times our speed value, which we defined up here somewhere. And now that should be just about it. Okay, so I am inside of the scene here, and I just defined all the references I needed. I set the movement speed to 800, and we should see that this works. Okay, the sensitivity is way too high for me, but it does work. And you can see we are falling very slowly because I have the gravity set too low, apparently. But that is how you set up character movement in Flax. I will put this movement to script with a GitHub link in the description. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.